You don't lack discipline. You're protecting something. And until you understand what that is, you'll keep sabotaging growth without realizing it. You see, most people think they struggle because they need more motivation. That's rarely the problem. The real problem is identity preservation. You're not fighting laziness. You're fighting coherence. And every time you try to change, something inside you resists. Not loudly, quietly. You hesitate, you overthink, you delay. And that hesitation isn't weakness, it's protection. Because if you change, you don't just upgrade habits, you disrupt identity, you disrupt expectation, and you disrupt belonging. And that has a cost. The ego is not the villain. All right, before we go any further, we need to correct something. Most people talk about the ego like it's the enemy. It's not. The ego is not arrogance. It's not pride. It's not confidence. The ego is structure. It's the internal architect that keeps your identity stable. It answers 3 silent questions every day. Who am I? How do I operate? What keeps me safe? And safety, not success, is its primary objective. That's important because if you misunderstand the ego, you will fight the wrong battle. The ego doesn't wake up trying to sabotage you. It tries to preserve continuity. Continuity feels like control. Control feels like safety. Even if that continuity includes limitation. Even if it includes underachievement. Even if it includes patterns you say you want to break. The ego, it would rather you remain consistent than become exceptional. Okay, let's talk about the corporate high performer who won't leave. You have someone making good money, stable job, respected position, predictable schedule. They say they want to build something of their own, but every time they get close to taking action, they hesitate. They research more. They wait for right timing. They adjust the plan again. And it's not laziness. Their ego has built identity around, I am the reliable one. I make safe decisions. I provide stability. Leaving would destabilize that identity, even if the new path could lead to expansion. You see, the identity isn't stopping ambition. It's protecting coherence. Because consistency is predictable. And the brain values prediction accuracy more than possibility. Let that sit for a moment. Your nervous system prefers a predictable disappointment over an unpredictable opportunity. Why is that? Because prediction, it reduces uncertainty. And uncertainty to the brain, it has historically meant danger. So the ego builds a narrative, not a truth, a narrative. I'm this kind of person. I don't do that. That's not for me. This is just how I am. And over time, those statements, they become reinforced through repetition. And repetition becomes identity. Identity becomes defended. And anything that threatens identity feels destabilizing. Not logically, philosophically. This is where people get confused. You think you lack motivation. You think you're lazy. You think you just need more discipline. But what's actually happening is something deeper. When you attempt to change, you're threatening the structure that has kept you psychologically coherent. And coherence feels safe, even if the results don't. The ego's job is to maintain internal order. And internal order often means stay recognizable to yourself, stay familiar, stay within the boundaries that have worked before. Growth does not feel like an upgrade to the ego. It feels like disruption. And disruption is interpreted as risk. This is why real change feels uncomfortable before it feels empowering. You're not just adjusting habits. You are destabilizing an identity. And the ego will always defend the identity it built to survive. And this is not because it's evil, because it worked. Understand that version of you, it navigated your past. It handled the rejections. It handled failure. It handled embarrassment, pressure. It handled uncertainty. So the ego says, we survived this. We survived with this model. Why rewrite it? And that question makes sense. But survival modes are not always expansion modes. And this is where people plateau. They improve at the edges, but they don't alter the structure, because altering the structure feels like dismantling stability. So instead of confronting the ego, the mature approach is understanding it. If you understand that resistance is protection, not weakness, you stop attacking yourself. You start observing. You begin asking, what exactly is being protected right now? What identity am I trying to preserve? And is that the identity still serving the direction I claim I want? That question changes everything. Because now you're not fighting yourself. You're negotiating with a structure that was built for safety, not scale. And until you recognize that, you will mistake internal protection for personal limitation. The ego is not the villain. It's the gatekeeper of identity. And if you're going to evolve, you will have to pass through it, not around it. If your resistance isn't weakness, what is it protecting? How limitations become identity. No one wakes up at 12 years old and decides, I'm going to limit myself. Limits are not chosen consciously. They're installed gradually, quietly, through repetition, through interpretation, through emotional imprinting. All right, and here's how it happens. An experience occurs. You try something. You fail. You get embarrassed. You're corrected publicly. You're compared. You're rejected. In that moment, your brain does what it's designed to do. It creates meaning. Not accuracy. Meaning. And the meaning usually sounds like, I'm not good at this. This isn't for me. I'm not that type of person. One moment becomes a pattern. One pattern becomes a belief. One belief becomes reinforced behavior. And repeated behavior becomes identity. As a case study, I'm just not confident. A woman in her 30s says she's never been confident. When you look closer, at 14, she gave a presentation and classmates laughed. At 16, she was told she was too quiet. At 20, she was compared to a more outspoken sibling. 3 moments reinforced over time, she began avoiding situations that required visibility. Avoidance reinforced anxiety. Anxiety reinforced the identity. Now it feels like a personality trait. But it was a series of adaptations. How one emotionally charged moment can shape a decade of behavior. This is where it hardens. Because once something becomes identity, it stops feeling optional. It feels factual. I'm just bad with money. Maybe you made poor decisions at 19. Maybe no one taught you financial literacy. Maybe you were raised around instability. But repetition locked the behavior in. Now it feels like a trait. I'm not confrontational. Maybe confrontation once led to rejection. Maybe your environment punished disagreement, so you adapted. Avoid conflict, preserve connection. That adaptation worked. So the ego stored it as, this is how we are. And the more you repeat it, the more socially reinforced it becomes. People start describing you that way. You're so easygoing. You're so chill. You never cause problems. Now your identity is externally confirmed, which makes it even harder to outgrow. Because identity is not just internal, it's relational. People relate to the version of you they understand. The moment you shift that version, you introduced instability into your social ecosystem. So the ego doubles down. All right, let's go deeper. The brain is wired for efficiency. It builds shortcuts. If a behavior repeatedly reduced discomfort, the brain labels it adaptive. It doesn't ask, is this maximizing my potential? No, it asked, did this reduce threat? If yes, store it. And over years, those stored adaptations become personality traits. But personality is often just preserved coping. The disciplined person may have grown up in chaos. Order became survival. The funny one may have used humor to deflect tension. The hyper-independent one may have learned not to rely on anyone. These are intelligent adaptations, but they were built for a context, and context has changed. You see, here's the danger. If you confuse adaptation with identity, you will defend it, even when it's outdated. Because defending identity feels like defending self. This is why growth feels like self-betrayal sometimes. When you try to become assertive after years of being agreeable, it feels unnatural. And not because it's wrong, because it conflicts with the stored identity. And then the ego whispers, this isn't you. But here's the deeper truth. It isn't who you've practiced being. That's different. Most people never question their self-concept. They question their effort. They question their discipline. They question their consistency. But they don't question the identity structure driving those behaviors. If you believe you are not the type to lead, you will unconsciously avoid situations that test that belief. If you believe you're bad with money, you will subconsciously confirm it through behavior. Because identity seeks evidence, not expansion. So it'll filter your perception. It will interpret neutral events as confirmation. You hesitate once. See, I'm not confident. You make one mistake. See, I'm not built for this. This is called identity congruent bias. And it's powerful. Because once a limitation becomes identity, it stops feeling negotiable. It feels like fact. But it isn't fact. It's repetition solidified. And repetition can be rewritten. But rewriting it requires destabilizing the old script, which is why most people don't. Because challenging identity feels more threatening than tolerating mediocrity. That's the psychological tension. You don't protect your limitations, because you love them. You protect them because they're familiar. And familiarity feels like safety. So before we talk about expansion, you have to ask, what traits do I think are permanent that may have started as protection? What parts of me feel fixed that were actually built in response to old conditions? Because if you don't separate identity from adaptation, you will fight the wrong war. And you will keep trying to upgrade behavior without upgrading the structure underneath it. And behavior without structural change always reverts. Always. What if who you think you are is just what worked back then? Why growth feels like internal threat? When you attempt real growth, something subtle happens. Your nervous system reacts before your mindset does. That reaction is rarely discussed. All right, let's break it down carefully. Your brain is a prediction machine. It builds internal models of how you behave. It builds internal models of how others respond, what outcomes to expect, what environments feel safe. The more predictable your life is, the less energy your brain uses. Prediction equals efficiency. Efficiency equals safety. Now here's the shift. The moment you attempt growth, you introduce unpredictability. You speak up when you normally wouldn't. You set a boundary you've never set. You raise your standards. You enter a new room. You attempt something you've never attempted. Your old prediction model no longer applies, and the brain does not like invalidated models. Invalidated models equal uncertainty, and uncertainty equals potential threat. Not logical threat, perceived threat. So what do you feel? Tension, anxiety, self-doubt, physical discomfort. Not because the action is wrong, because it's unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity creates caution. This is where most people misinterpret the signal. They think this feels wrong. But what's actually happening is this feels new. You see, the nervous system, it can't initially distinguish between danger and novelty. Okay, here we have the first boundary. A man who has always been the easygoing friend. He finally says no to a last-minute favor. And immediately after sending a text, he feels a tight chest. Overthinking. Worry about tone. Has an urge to send a follow-up apology. Nothing actually happened, but his nervous system is reacting. Why? Because historically, agreeable equaled accepted. Disagreeable equaled risky. So even though the boundary is healthy, his body interpreted it as social danger. Both are uncertain. So when you step outside your identity boundaries, your body responds as if something risky is happening. Your heart rate increases. Thought loops activate. Worst case scenarios appear. It's not because you're incapable. It's because your stability system is recalibrating. All right, let's make this practical. You've been agreeable your whole life. You decide to say no to something that drains you. The moment you say it, you feel tightness. Your mind races. What if they're upset? What if this changes things? What if they distance themselves? Your nervous system registers potential social rejection. And social rejection historically meant survival risk. So your body reacts as if you're stepping into danger, even though you're just setting a boundary. You see, growth disrupts prediction. Disrupted prediction triggers alertness. Alertness feels uncomfortable, and most people retreat right here. They interpret the discomfort as, I'm not built for this. This isn't natural. This isn't me. But it's not unnatural. It's unpracticed. There's a difference. Yeah, let's go one level deeper. The ego is invested in identity coherence. The nervous system is invested in safety. When you attempt identity expansion, you activate both systems at once. The ego says, who are we becoming? The nervous system asks, is this safe? And until both receive enough evidence that the new behavior is stable and survivable, they will generate resistance. This is why discipline feels hard in the beginning. Not because you lack ability, because your system hasn't recalibrated. This is why raising standards creates internal friction. Not because high standards are wrong, it's because your identity hasn't normalized them. This is why ambition can feel isolating, because your internal model hasn't adjusted to the new trajectory. Most people try to overpower this stage with motivation. That rarely works long term, because you're fighting biology with enthusiasm. What actually creates lasting change? Repetition under stability. You expose the system to the new behavior, and then you survive it. Nothing catastrophic happens. You repeat. Gradually, the nervous system updates its prediction model. This is safe. The ego updates identity. This is who we are now. But that recalibration period is unpredictable. And here's the part most people, they won't admit. That discomfort feels like loss before it feels like progress. Loss of ease, loss of certainty, loss of your previous self-concept. This is why people sabotage themselves right before growth begins to work. Because the internal alert system is still active. They retreat to familiarity. Familiarity reduces tension immediately. And the brain rewards tension reduction, because short-term relief beats long-term expansion. And unless you understand what's happening, when you understand that resistance is a recalibration phase, not a verdict, you stop panicking when discomfort shows up. You start expecting it. You interpret it differently. Instead of something's wrong, you think, my system is updating. And that shift alone separates people who plateau from people who transform. Because growth isn't blocked by difficulty. It's blocked by misinterpretation of difficulty. The discomfort it's not a stop sign. It's a transitional sign. But only if you stay long enough for the model to update. And most don't. Let me ask you a question. The last time you felt tension, did you assume something was wrong? The social cost of becoming different. When you evolve, you don't do it in isolation. Even if the work is internal, the impact is external. Every identity exists inside a network, inside of a family, friends, coworkers, partners. And every network has a balance. Unspoken roles, unspoken expectations, unspoken hierarchies. You may not notice them until you disrupt them. All right, let's make it clear. If you've always been the agreeable one, if you've always been the laid back one, the one who doesn't challenge anything, the one who plays small, the one who jokes instead of leads. People orient themselves around that version of you. They build comfort around it. They predict you based on it. Now imagine you change. You start setting boundaries. You stop laughing at things you used to tolerate. You become more disciplined, more focused, more selective with your time. You haven't attacked anyone. You've just altered your standard. But here's what happens psychologically. Your change becomes a mirror. Let's make this simple. The fitness shift. Someone commits to health seriously for the first time. They stop drinking regularly. They wake up early. They prioritize sleep. Suddenly, friends joke about it, invite them less. They say you've changed. And on the surface, it looks trivial. But underneath, it's identity shift disrupting group norms. The group bonded over late nights and shared indulgences. Now one member steps outside the script. The group tries to pull him back, but it's not out of hate, out of homeostasis. You see, your change becomes a mirror, and mirrors make people aware. If you become disciplined, it can highlight someone else's lack of discipline. If you become focused, it can highlight someone else's distraction. If you become ambitious, it can highlight someone else's stagnation. It's not intentionally, but perception is comparison based. And comparison creates tension. So the system tries to to rebalance, not maliciously, just instinctively. You may hear, you've changed. You're taking this too serious. Don't forget where you come from. You used to be fun. And on the surface, it sounds harmless. Underneath, it's feedback from the system. It's the environment attempting to restore the old equilibrium, because groups seek stability. And when one member shifts significantly, the structure has to adjust. An adjustment is uncomfortable. And now here's the deeper layer. Belonging is one of the strongest psychological needs. Stronger than achievement, stronger than status. Belonging equals safety. When you begin to evolve, you risk altering belonging, and your ego knows that. So when you feel resistance internally, sometimes it isn't about capability, it's about connection. You're not just asking, can I become this? You're subconsciously acting, if I become this, who stays? And that question, it carries weight. And most people unconsciously choose belonging over expansion. Because expansion without belonging feels isolating. And this is where growth becomes emotionally expensive. You may outgrow conversations. You may outgrow environments, outgrow humor that once felt normal, outgrow habits that bonded you to certain people. And here's the tension. You don't want to look down on anyone. You don't want to disconnect, but you also can't ignore what you see now. Awareness changes tolerance, and tolerance shifts relationships. Some people will adjust with you. Some will respect it. Some will distance themselves quietly. Some will subtly push back. Not because they hate you. It's because your shift destabilizes their comfort. And when that happens, your nervous system registers potential rejection. And this right here loops us right back to something we was previously mentioning. Now the internal and the external, the pressures combined, you feel a doubt. You feel guilt. You feel the loneliness, second guessing. Not because growth is wrong. It's because growth rearranges dynamics. And we're going to keep going deeper. Sometimes the pushback, it won't be loud. It'll be subtle. Less invitations. Shorter responses. Energy shifts. You'll feel it before it's spoken. And this is where many people shrink back. They soften their standards. They joke again to restore ease. They skip discipline to reconnect. They dilute themselves to reduce friction. Because friction feels like social risk. But here's the truth most avoid. Not everyone is meant to experience every version of you. And that doesn't make you superior. just makes you evolving. Growth naturally filters environments, not aggressively, but inevitably. If your trajectory changes, your alignment changes. And alignment determines proximity. That can feel lonely, especially in the middle stage, because you may not yet have new environments that match your expansion. So it's like you exist between identities, between groups, between versions. In that in that space, it feels unstable, which is why many retreat. Not because they can't grow, it's because the social cost feels too high. This is where clarity matters. You have to decide. Is comfort in the current structure worth long-term stagnation? Or is temporary instability worth long-term alignment? Because both have a cost. Staying has a cost. Becoming has a cost. One is immediate discomfort. The other is quiet regret. And regret compounds. Social friction is not proof you're wrong. Sometimes it's proof you're moving. But only if the movement is intentional. Where are you minimizing yourself to stay comfortable? The identity gap. There's a phase in growth that feels disorientating. Not dramatic, not explosive, just unstable. You're no longer comfortable being who you were, but you are not yet solid in who you're becoming. This is where most people quietly turn back. The entrepreneur in year one left stable job, started business. Income unstable. Confidence inconsistent. Old co-workers moving up in their careers. New identity, founder. Old identity, employee. But revenue hasn't stabilized yet. So internally, it feels like, was I better off before? They don't fully relate to old coworkers anymore, but they also don't feel established in the entrepreneurial world. That space is the identity gap. And it's where most people retreat. Let's define it clearly. Old behaviors feel restrictive, but new behaviors feel unnatural. Old environments feel small, but new environments feel intimidating. Old conversations feel repetitive, but new conversations feel unfamiliar. You're in transition, and transition has no clear footing. This is psychologically exhausting because identity provides coherence. It gives you predictability, gives you recognition. Confidence is how to operate. It gives you a sense of belonging. When identity destabilizes, coherence drops. And without coherence, confidence wavers. And this is where imposter syndrome shows up. Not because you're fraudulent, but because the new identity hasn't integrated yet. You act differently, but you don't fully believe it yet. You speak with more authority, but internally, part of you still hears the old narrative. You raise your standards, but sometimes you still crave the old comfort. And that contradiction creates tension. But here's the important part. Contradiction does not mean regression. It means transition. But the ego hates transition because transition lacks definition. You can't clearly answer, who am I now? And if you can't answer that confidently, you feel exposed. So what do most people do here? They retreat to certainty. They go back to old habits, to old roles. They go back to old environments. They go back to old energy levels. Because even limited certainty feels better than undefined expansion. Let's go deeper. In the identity gap, we experience 3 common psychological pressures. 1, internal doubt. 2, social disconnection. And 3, performance fatigue. Internal doubt sounds like, maybe I was fine the way I was. Maybe I'm forcing this. Maybe I'm overcomplicating things. Social disconnection sounds like, I don't fully relate here anymore. But I don't fully belong there neither. Performance fatigue sounds like, maintaining this new standard is draining. Not because the standard is wrong, because it isn't automated. Automation equals identity integration. Right now, you're still conscious of it. And anything conscious requires effort. Effort feels heavy. This is the quiet test. It's not whether you can start, whether you can stay. Most people mistake the identity gap for failure. They think, if this was meant for me, it wouldn't feel this unstable. But instability is a necessary stage of reconstruction. If a building is being renovated, there's a phase where it looks worse before it looks complete. Structures are exposed, walls are removed, temporary supports are visible. It doesn't look polished, but it is progressing. The identity gap is a psychological renovation. Old structures are dismantled. New frameworks are forming. But until reinforcement sets in, it feels fragile. And this is where patience becomes discipline. You don't force certainty. You build repetition. You continue behaving in alignment with the future identity, even when it doesn't feel fully natural yet. Because identity stabilizes through evidence, repeated evidence. When your nervous system sees you've acted this way 30 times, nothing catastrophic happens. It updates. When your ego sees this behavior is consistent, others respond accordingly. It integrates, and slowly the gap closes. But here's the reality. Not everyone tolerates this phase because it feels lonely, and humans are wired to avoid prolonged uncertainty. The ones who transform are not the most confident. They're the most tolerant of instability. That's the distinction. They don't interpret instability as a sign to stop. They interpret it as a sign they are reconstructing. And reconstruction always looks messy mid-process. The identity gap is not where you evaluate your decision. It's where you commit to it. Are you pulling back because it doesn't fit or because it's new? The quiet grief of outgrowing yourself. There's something people don't talk about when it comes to growth. Grief. Not loud grief. Not dramatic grief. Quiet grief. When you outgrow a version of yourself, you don't just gain something, you lose something. And even if that version was limited, it was familiar. It carried memories. It carried comfort. It carried a certain ease. The earlier version of you required less discipline, less responsibility, less awareness. You blended in more easily. You didn't question as much. You didn't carry the weight of higher standards. There's a simplicity to that. And when you move beyond it, part of you misses it. That doesn't mean you want to go back. It means you're human. Let's be precise. When you raise your standards, you lose tolerance for certain environments. That can mean fewer conversations feel stimulating, fewer rooms feel aligned, fewer relationships feel natural. And even if those changes are necessary, there is an emotional cost. You may miss the version of you that laughed at everything. You may miss the version of you that didn't overthink impact. You may miss the version of you that didn't feel the weight of growth. You may miss even the excuses, because excuses removed pressure. Pressure creates expectation. Expectation creates responsibility. Responsibility changes how you see yourself. Growth increases awareness, and awareness removes the comfort of ignorance. You can't unknow what you know now. You can't unknow what you now see. There's no more shrinking your standards without feeling it. That's the grief. You lose the option to be unaware. Here's where this becomes personal. Outgrowing a long-term social circle. Someone realizes conversations in their old circle revolve around gossip, complaints. They still care about the people, but the alignment feels off. They don't laugh at the same things anymore. They don't feel stimulated. They leave hangouts feeling drained. There's sadness, not because the people are bad, but because growth created distance. That sadness is grief. You lose the comfort of old narratives. You lose certain dynamics that once felt effortless. And even if those dynamics were limiting, they were known. The ego doesn't just resist growth. It mourns familiarity. That's important to acknowledge. If you pretend growth is only empowering, you will feel confused when sadness shows up. But sadness doesn't mean regression. It means transition. You are releasing a version of yourself that carried you through previous chapters. That version did its job. It protected you. It navigated you through certain environments. It survived. There should be respect for that. But survival is not the ceiling. At some point, preservation becomes constraint. And when you step beyond that constraint, you feel the separation. This is why sometimes during growth, you feel reflective. You look back. You replay your old memories. You think about who you used to be. Not because you want to return, because you're integrating. Healthy growth includes honoring the old self without reattaching to it. You don't resent who you were. You recognize that you've expanded beyond it. And expansion naturally creates distance. Distance from habits, distance from environments, distance from internal narratives. Distance can feel lonely, but it also creates space, and space allows reconstruction. Grief is not a signal to retreat. It's a signal that something meaningful is being released. If there were no emotion, there would be no attachment. If there was no attachment, there would be no identity to evolve. So when you feel that quiet pull backward, don't interpret it as weakness. Interpret it as closure forming. Because every evolved identity requires the graceful release of the previous one. If you keep holding the old version, what does that cost you? Choose an expansion anyway. At this point, the pattern should be clear. Growth isn't blocked by laziness. It's filtered by protection. The ego protects continuity. The nervous system protects safety. The social system protects balance. And when you attempt to evolve, you disturb all three. That disturbance feels like internal resistance, social friction, identity instability, emotional heaviness. And if you don't understand the architect behind it, you will interpret it all as a sign to stop. But it's not a stop sign. It's structural feedback. Because you're reconfiguring who you are. And reconfiguration is never silent. Now, let's be direct. Becoming different requires tolerating being misunderstood temporarily. It requires tolerating instability temporarily. It requires tolerating the feeling of not fully belonging temporarily. And most people don't fail because they can't grow. They fail because they cannot tolerate the in-between long enough. They want the updated identity without the reconstruction phase. But identity doesn't upgrade instantly. It stabilizes through repetition. It stabilizes through evidence, through exposure. You don't become confident. You behave confidently long enough that the nervous system recalibrates and your ego updates the narrative. You don't become disciplined. You act with discipline long enough that it no longer feels like effort. It feels like standard. And here's the part that matters. Expansion isn't loud. Here's what it actually looks like. The quiet standard shift. No announcement. No dramatic post. Just saying no more often. Showing up earlier. Spending differently. Speaking more directly. Protecting time. 6 months later, life looks different. Not because of intensity, because of repetition. It's not performative. It's not announced. It's practiced. Quietly. Consistently. Until the old version no longer fits. There will be moments where retreat feels easier, where blending back in feels simpler, where lowering the standard would reduce friction instantly. And you will be tempted. Not because you're weak. It's because you're wired for safety. So the real question becomes, what kind of discomfort are you willing to carry? The discomfort of temporary instability or the discomfort of long-term stagnation? One is sharp but short-lived. The other is subtle but compounding. And if you choose expansion, understand what you're agreeing to. Temporary misalignment, temporary doubt, temporary loneliness, temporary uncertainty. But understand, I do mean temporary. If you remain steady through that phase, the system updates. The identity stabilizes. The new standard becomes natural. And what once felt disruptive becomes baseline. You don't destroy the old self violently. You outgrow it deliberately. And once outgrown, it no longer feels like loss. It feels like progression. The ego will always attempt to preserve the version of you that survived. But survival is not the ceiling. At some point, you have to decide. Are you protecting who you were or building who you're becoming? And that decision is rarely dramatic. It's made in quiet repetitions, small standards held consistently, boundaries maintained calmly. Disciplined actions execute without announcement. That's how identity shifts. It's not through intensity, it's through stability. You don't bypass the ego. You retrain it. You don't silence resistance. You move through it long enough that it recalibrates. And when that recalibration completes, you won't feel like you became someone else. You will feel like you became aligned. You will feel like you became aligned. So 6 months from now, will you still be protecting the same identity? This is results.